Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. The sounds of the firing range were constant during training operations. Weapons discharge, shouted commands, the organized chaos of Marines preparing for combat. On a Tuesday afternoon in September, the main range was in full operation with 3 different platoons running live fire exercises. Private First Class Lena Rodriguez was picking up brass. She wore the lowest rank insignia, the uniform of someone fresh out of basic training. Her movements were efficient but not exceptional. She kept her head down, her mouth shut, and did her job without drawing attention to herself. What nobody knew was that Lena Rodriguez had picked up brass at this exact range 14 years ago. She'd been a different person then, a different rank, a different name. Her real name was Gunnery Sergeant Lena Valdez. She'd served 22 years in the Marine Corps. She'd been a decorated sniper with 2 combat deployments. She'd trained dozens of snipers. She'd earned 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart. She'd saved lives and lost friends. And 14 months ago, she decided to disappear. The situation at home had become impossible. Her husband, a man she'd married during her 2nd deployment, had become increasingly abusive. Emotionally at first, then physically. She'd reported it to her command. They'd offered her options, counseling, military family services. She'd tried everything. But her husband had connections. His father was a congressman. When Lena had filed for divorce and restraining order, her husband's lawyers had come at her with everything they had. They'd questioned her fitness as a Marine. They'd suggested her military career had damaged her mental health. They'd implied that her combat experience made her unstable, that her PTSD made her a danger to herself and others. In the end, Lena had lost custody of her daughter. Her daughter, Emma, had been 12 years old. The court had awarded her to Lena's husband, saying that the mother's military service made her an unsuitable primary caregiver. Lena had fought the decision through every available appeal, but money, influence, and the persistent bias against female combat veterans had won out. She'd lost her daughter, and in that moment of despair, she'd made a decision. She'd changed her name. She'd left the Marine Corps under slightly dishonest circumstances. She'd become someone new. A junior enlisted Marine at a different base, far enough away that nobody who'd known her before would recognize her. She'd taken the name Rodriguez from her mother's maiden name. She'd claimed to be a 19-year-old fresh out of basic training. She'd requested assignment to Camp Lejeune, knowing she could navigate the base while remaining invisible, and she'd started her plan. The plan was simple: earn enough money working under her assumed identity to hire a lawyer who could help her challenge the custody decision. A lawyer who wasn't connected to the military establishment. A lawyer who could help her prove that she was a fit mother, that her daughter should be with her. It was a desperate plan. It was also dangerous. If she was discovered, if anyone realized who she actually was, everything would collapse. She'd face investigation for fraudulent enlistment. She'd face the possibility of court-martial. She'd face the end of any credibility she might have in a custody battle. But she was desperate. She was willing to take the risk. So she picked up brass. She cleaned weapons. She did the work of the lowest-ranked enlisted Marine. She lived in a small apartment off base and spent every free moment researching family law, custody appeals, and the lawyers who specialized in military custody cases. She was doing her job, collecting cartridges, when she heard the sniper team arrive. The team consisted of 4 people, 2 active snipers, 1 spotter, and 1 instructor. The instructor was a senior master gunnery sergeant named David Cross. David was 52 years old, had been a sniper for 26 years, and had trained over 100 combat snipers during his career. David was walking the range to set up the exercise when he noticed something. There was a woman in junior enlisted rank, picking up brass, who was doing something unusual. She was listening, not just hearing the sounds, but actually listening. Her ears were tracking the sound of the sniper rifle from different distances, different angles, different acoustical environments. Her body was subtly adjusting its position based on the wind, the way only someone with years of experience would do. David had been around shooting ranges his entire military career. He knew what a rookie looked like. This woman didn't look like a rookie. She looked like someone who belonged on this range, someone who understood it, someone who was familiar with the acoustic properties of a sniper rifle. David finished setting up the exercise and tried to dismiss the feeling, but it nagged at him. He kept watching this woman as she moved across the range. And the more he watched, the more certain he became. She was not a PFC fresh out of basic training. She had the bearing of someone with significant experience. During the first break in the exercise, David walked over to her. "Private Rodriguez," he said, reading the name tape on her uniform. "Gunnery Sergeant," Lena said, straightening up. She used the proper response protocol for a junior enlisted Marine addressing a senior NCO. "How long have you been in the Corps?" David asked. "About 14 months since graduation from Basic Gunnery Sergeant," Lena lied smoothly. David looked at her carefully. "You ever fired a rifle before Basic?" "Some hunting with my family growing up, Gunnery Sergeant," Lena said. This was true. Her civilian father had taken her hunting as a teenager before she joined the Marines at 18. "Interesting," David said, "because I've been running this range for 26 years, and I've never seen a junior enlisted Marine stand the way you stand. I've never seen a junior enlisted Marine move the way you move." Lena felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. I try to maintain proper military bearing." "It's not about bearing," David said. "It's about something else, something that usually only comes from years of experience. You familiar with sniper operations, Private?" "No, Gunnery Sergeant." David continued to study her. "You ever considered sniper training?" "No, Gunnery Sergeant. I'm not interested in that." "You're not interested or you're not allowed?" David asked, his tone suggesting he suspected the latter. Lena didn't answer. She just went back to picking up brass. But David didn't let it go. Throughout the rest of the exercise, he found himself watching her, watching the way she moved, watching the way she positioned herself, watching the way she responded to the sounds of weapons fire. And with each observation, he became more convinced that this woman was not who she claimed to be. David Cross had been in the Marine Corps long enough to know that there were sometimes irregular situations. He'd known people who'd left service and then returned for various reasons. He'd known people who'd changed their identities for personal reasons, but it was rare, and it was almost always against regulations. The question was, what was he going to do about what he suspected? He had several options. He could report his suspicions to command. He could directly confront Private Rodriguez and ask her directly if her information was false. Or he could let it go and assume he was just an old sniper seeing patterns that weren't there. David decided to do something different. He decided to watch, and he decided to ask questions. Over the next 2 weeks, David requested that Lena be assigned to help with the sniper training program. He said he needed personnel who could move quietly and follow directions. Lena's squad leader approved the assignment. Now Lena was working with David directly. She was spotting for the snipers. She was learning the current training methods. She was working at a level of tactical sophistication that far exceeded what a 14-month veteran should be capable of. And David was watching everything. One day, during a break in the training, David made a comment designed to test her response. "We had a really good sniper come through here about 15 years ago," David said casually. "Woman named Valdez, one of the best I ever trained. She was a natural, could read wind like it was written in the sky. I've never seen another sniper quite like her." Lena's entire body went rigid. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped. David saw something flash in her eyes: recognition, connection, pain. "What happened to her?" Lena asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Honestly, I don't know," David said. "She was at Camp Lejeune about 14 years ago, then she disappeared from the system. Last I heard, she'd left the Corps. I always wondered what happened to her. She had so much potential." Lena didn't say anything. She just went back to her job. But that night, David made a decision. He went to his computer and started researching. He pulled up records from 14 years ago. He looked for snipers named Valdez, and he found her. Gunnery Sergeant Lena Valdez, exceptional record. 2 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart. Discharged 14 months ago under the category of personal reasons. David then did something that made him uncomfortable. He hacked into the Marine Corps personnel database. Not deeply, not in a way that would be detected, but enough to find the current status. And he found something interesting. There had been a recent enlistment of a PFC Rodriguez at this base. The enlistment had been processed with minimal documentation. The background check had been cursory. The person had requested assignment to Camp Lejeune. Everything had checked out at the time, but now David was seeing patterns that suggested something was wrong. He printed out the records and compared the photos. PFC Rodriguez and Gunnery Sergeant Valdez were the same person. Older, thinner, different hair, but the same person. David put the documents away, and then he did something that surprised even himself. He decided to keep Lena's secret, at least for now, at least until he understood what was really going on. Over the next month, David created opportunities for Lena to work with him. He kept her on the sniper range. He worked with her in ways that allowed her to use her expertise without drawing attention. And slowly, carefully, he started to build a relationship based on trust. One afternoon, after a training exercise was completed and everyone else had left, David asked Lena to help him clean the equipment. While they worked, he asked a simple question. "What's really going on, Gunnery Sergeant Valdez?" Lena froze. She didn't answer for a long moment. Then very quietly she asked, "How did you know?" "Because I've been shooting for 26 years, David said. And I know the difference between someone who learned to shoot 14 months ago and someone who's been shooting for 2 decades. You didn't have to tell me. Your body told me. Your reflexes told me. The way you read the range told me." Lena sat down on one of the equipment boxes. She looked older suddenly, tired, like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "If you report me," she said, "everything falls apart, my custody case, my chances of getting my daughter back, everything." "I'm not going to report you," David said, "but I need to understand what's happening. I need to know why a decorated sniper is pretending to be a recruit. I need to know why you left the Corps." So Lena told him. She told him about her marriage, about the abuse, about losing custody of her daughter, about the powerful people who'd conspired against her, about the desperation that had led her to commit fraud and hide her identity. David listened to the entire story without interrupting. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. "You can't keep doing this," he said finally. "Not because I'm going to turn you in, but because you're going to get caught. And when you do, it's going to make everything worse, your custody case, your credibility, everything." "I know," Lena said, "but I don't know what else to do. I need money for a good lawyer. I need to prove that I'm a capable mother despite my military service. And I need to do it without anyone knowing that I'm doing it." "There's another way," David said. "There's a better way." David Cross had spent 26 years in the Marine Corps, and in that time he'd built significant relationships with senior leadership. He knew generals. He knew senators. He knew people who cared about the integrity of military families and the rights of military personnel. And he decided to use those relationships to help Lena. First, David went to the commanding officer of Camp Lejeune. He explained the situation in detail. He explained that PFC Rodriguez was actually Gunnery Sergeant Valdez, and that she'd committed fraud in her enlistment, but that she'd done so under extraordinary personal circumstances. The commanding officer was initially angry about the fraud, but he was also a fair man. He listened to David's explanation. He understood that something unusual and serious was going on. "What do you recommend?" the co asked. "I recommend we handle this quietly," David said. "I recommend we discharge her with an honorable discharge, clear her record of the current fraud, and help her fight for custody of her daughter." "That's asking a lot," the co said. "She broke regulations." "She did," David agreed. "But she did it because the system failed her. She did it because a mother was desperate to get her child back. And I think we can do better than just punishing her for breaking rules when the rules themselves were unjust." The co thought about it, then he made a decision. Over the next 2 weeks, the discharge was processed. Lena's record was cleared of the fraud charge. She was given an honorable discharge as Gunnery Sergeant Lena Valdez, with full recognition of her 22 years of service. But that was just the first step. David then reached out to his connections. He contacted a senior military legal advisor he'd known for years. He explained Lena's situation. He provided all the documentation of her service, her capabilities, and her character. The legal advisor was appalled by what had happened in the custody case. He agreed that a decorated veteran with exemplary service was being treated unfairly, and he agreed to help Lena for free. "This is wrong on every level," the legal advisor said. "A woman serves her country, earns 2 Bronze Stars, and her reward is losing her daughter because her abusive ex-husband has more money and influence. We're going to fix this. The legal team spent the next 3 months building a case. They documented Lena's military service. They documented the abuse. They hired a psychiatrist to evaluate Lena and testify that her military service had not affected her ability to parent. They interviewed witnesses who could testify about her character and her love for her daughter. And they discovered something important. The original custody proceedings had involved judicial bias. The judge who'd awarded custody to Lena's husband had been contacted by the congressman several times outside of court. There had been communication that suggested improper influence. The case went back to court with new evidence. This time, the outcome was different. The judge looked at the documentation of Lena's military service. The judge looked at the testimony about her character. The judge looked at the evidence of judicial bias in the original proceedings. And the judge made a new decision. Custody of Emma was to be transferred to Lena with generous visitation rights for her father. Lena walked out of the courtroom holding her daughter's hand. Emma was 16 now. She barely remembered her mother. But as they walked, Lena felt something shift inside her. The weight she'd been carrying for 14 months finally began to lift. David Cross was waiting in the courthouse hallway. "Congratulations," he said. Lena hugged him, and for the first time in more than a year she cried, not from pain or desperation, but from relief, from hope, from the knowledge that she had her daughter back. 6 months after the custody battle was resolved, Lena was living in a house with her daughter. Emma was adjusting to living with her mother again. It was difficult. They'd lost years. They had to rebuild their relationship, but they had time now. They had a future. Lena also had a job. David Cross had helped her secure a position as a civilian consultant with the Marine Corps. She taught advanced sniper training courses. She worked with active-duty snipers to help them refine their skills. She was using her expertise in a way that didn't require her to be active duty, but that allowed her to continue serving. The story of what had happened eventually became known. Not the details, but the basic facts. A decorated female sniper had left the service under unusual circumstances. She'd fought her way back, and she'd won. Military publications picked up the story. Lena was interviewed about her experience. She was honest about the abuse. She was honest about the bias in the custody system. She was honest about the fact that military service, particularly combat service, shouldn't disqualify a woman from being a good mother. Her story resonated with people. It resonated with female veterans who'd faced similar situations. It resonated with women considering military service who worried about how it would affect their futures as mothers. More importantly, her story prompted policy changes. The Department of Defense began looking more carefully at custody cases involving military service members. New guidelines were established to prevent judicial bias against service members solely because of their military service. Lena became an advocate. She started speaking at military family conferences. She started working with organizations that supported female veterans. She became a voice for women who'd been treated unfairly by a system that was supposed to protect them. One day, a young female Marine approached her after a speaking engagement. The Marine said, "I'm considering leaving the service because I'm worried about what it will do to my kids. But after hearing your story, I understand that staying is possible. That being a good mother and being a good Marine isn't mutually exclusive." Lena hugged that young Marine, and she understood that her journey, as difficult as it had been, was helping other people navigate their own paths. 2 years after the custody decision, Lena received a call from David Cross. David had retired from the Marine Corps. He was now consulting on military training programs and serving on the board of a military veterans foundation. "I wanted to tell you something," David said. "Your story has had more impact than you probably realize. We've had dozens of policy changes because of what happened to you. And more importantly, we've had women stay in service who might have otherwise left because they believed it was impossible to be both a good Marine and a good mother." "Thank you for believing in me," Lena said. "Thank you for not reporting me when you found out who I really was." "I didn't report you," David said, "because I remembered something you once told me during your training. You said that a good sniper doesn't take shots at things that don't deserve to be shot at. You said a good sniper understands the difference between a target and a person. I understood that you weren't a target. You were a person in crisis, and I wanted to help, not hurt." 10 years after picking up brass as a PFC, Lena Rodriguez Valdez was standing in front of a room full of military commanders and policymakers. She was speaking about her experience, about the abuse, about the custody fight, about the fraud she'd committed out of desperation. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer pretending. She was telling the full truth, and she was doing it to people who had the power to make change. "I committed fraud," she said plainly. "I lied about my identity and my experience. I violated military regulations. I did all of this because I was desperate, and I did it because I saw no other way to fight for custody of my daughter in a system that was biased against me because of my military service." She paused, letting that statement hang in the room. "I'm not asking you to excuse what I did," she continued. "I'm asking you to understand why I did it. I'm asking you to look at the systems that made a decorated veteran feel like she had to hide her own identity in order to have a chance at justice. And I'm asking you to change those systems so that the next woman doesn't have to do what I did." The room was silent. And that silence, the same kind of silence that had shown Lena she was part of something larger in the Marine Corps, resonated with her now. "I got my daughter back," Lena said. "I rebuilt my relationship with her, and I dedicated the next decade to helping other women navigate systems that are stacked against them. That's my story. And now I'm asking you to help me make sure it doesn't have to be the story of the next woman." Following her speech, policy changes were implemented. The military court system was reviewed. New guidelines were established for judges in military family cases. Training programs were created to help military leaders understand the specific challenges that female service members faced in custody battles. Emma was now 26 years old. She was a college graduate studying public policy, inspired by her mother's journey to help reform broken systems. Lena was promoted to the position of senior advisor for military family policy at the Department of Defense. She was working directly with leadership to ensure that military service members were treated fairly in family law matters. David Cross had passed away at the age of 61, just a year after his final conversation with Lena about the impact of her story. At his funeral, Lena delivered the eulogy. "David Cross saw me," she said, standing before a room full of military personnel and civilians who'd known him. "Not the rank, not the title, not the uniform. He saw me as a person in crisis, and he chose compassion over protocol. He chose to help rather than harm, and in doing that, he changed the entire trajectory of my life." She looked out at the faces in the room. "David understood something fundamental," Lena continued. "He understood that sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is not follow the rules. Sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is recognize that the rules themselves are unjust, and make the decision to work around them to serve a greater good." 15 years after that Tuesday afternoon when she was picking up brass, Lena was invited to speak to a class of junior enlisted Marines at Camp Lejeune. She stood in front of young men and women, most of them fresh out of basic training, and told them a story. "I want to tell you about integrity," she said. "Not the kind of integrity where you follow the rules no matter what, but the kind of integrity where you understand who you are and what you stand for, and you refuse to let circumstance take that away from you." She told them about picking up brass. She told them about David Cross recognizing who she was. She told them about fighting for her daughter. She told them about the fraud and the desperation and the way she'd finally found her way back to being herself. "I broke rules," she said plainly. "I committed fraud. I lied about who I was, but I did it to maintain my integrity as a mother. I did it to fight for something I believed in. And while I'm not saying that fraud is ever acceptable, I am saying that sometimes life puts you in positions where there are no good options. And when that happens, you have to choose based on your core values." After the speech, a young female Marine came up to Lena. "Thank you for your honesty," the Marine said. "I'm struggling with whether to stay in the service because I want to have a family. Hearing that you found a way to do both, it gives me hope." Lena put her arm around the young Marine's shoulder. "It's possible," she said. "It's hard, it's painful sometimes, but it's possible. And more importantly, there are people who understand that it's possible. People like David Cross who see who you really are beneath the uniform. Find those people, hold on to them. They'll help you navigate the impossible." 20 years after picking up brass as a PFC named Rodriguez, Lena was presented with an award by the Department of Defense. The award recognized her work in reforming military family policy and her service to female military personnel. She accepted the award with her daughter beside her. Emma had finished her master's degree and was working as a policy analyst, inspired by her mother's fight for justice. Lena looked at the military leadership in the room, the same people who could have had her court-martialed 14 years ago if they'd discovered her fraud. "I'm standing here today," she said, "not because I broke rules without consequence. I'm standing here because I broke rules, faced those consequences, and then used my pain to help others avoid the same pain. That's not a victory, that's a calling." She paused, looking at the faces of the young people in the room, especially the young women. "If you're listening to this and you're struggling," Lena said, "understand that struggle doesn't disqualify you. Pain doesn't disqualify you. Making mistakes doesn't disqualify you. What qualifies you is your willingness to turn that pain into purpose. What qualifies you is your determination to help others avoid the mistakes that you made." That night, Lena sat in her home with her daughter. Emma was telling her about her latest project, a documentary about female military veterans and custody issues. "I want to tell your story," Emma said. "The full story, including the fraud, including the desperation. I want people to understand that you're not just a decorated veteran. You're also a woman who made desperate choices to protect your family." Lena felt tears in her eyes. "Are you sure that's wise?" she asked. "I mean, it will bring up the fraud again." "Mom," Emma said, "you've spent 20 years helping people. You've helped reform policies that protect thousands of military service members. The fraud is part of that story. It's part of who you are. And I want the world to know that about you." Lena hugged her daughter, and she understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell your whole story. The good parts and the painful parts and the desperate parts and the victorious parts. Because someone out there is living that same story, and they need to know that it's possible to survive it. It's possible to transform it. It's possible to use it to help others. The documentary was released 2 years later. It was called Picking Up Brass: How One Woman's Desperation Became a Movement. It won awards at film festivals. It was shown in military training programs. It inspired policy changes at both state and federal levels. But most importantly, it gave hope to women who were struggling. It showed them that being a good Marine and being a good mother weren't mutually exclusive. It showed them that the system could be changed. And it showed them that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth about who you really are. Lena Rodriguez Valdez had picked up brass. She'd hidden her identity. She'd fought a desperate battle. And in the end, she'd transformed her pain into a movement that helped thousands of women navigate the impossible. That was her legacy, not the fraud, but the courage that came after it, the willingness to turn desperation into purpose, the determination to help others avoid the same pain. That was what it meant to be a Marine, not just the uniform and the training and the combat, but the willingness to never give up, the willingness to keep fighting even when the enemy is the system itself, the willingness to use your pain to help others find their way home.